82 in the morning. A fire took my house down to the slab. I walked 4 miles through freezing rain in pajamas and one boot and knocked on my daughter's door. The porch light came on. A shadow moved behind the glass, looked at me standing there, soaked, and switched the light back off. Nobody opened. 6 days later, a 7-year-old's drawing proved that fire was set on purpose, and when I followed it to a cabin on the lake, the woman sitting at the table was my wife. I buried her 9 years ago. Welcome to bitter autumn. Thank you for being here. It means more than you know. Tell me in the comments which country or city you're listening from so I know who's beside me tonight. Please note this story contains fictional elements added for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to existing names or settings is coincidental. The lesson is useful. I have wired 3,000 buildings in 34 years, and I still could not tell you why my own house decided to kill me at 2 hours 14 minutes past midnight. I built that house myself on 62 acres in Wexford Hollow. I pulled every run of wire in it with my own 2 hands. I knew the load on every breaker the way a man knows his own pulse. That is the reason the smell woke me instead of the heat. The smell was sweet. Even half asleep in green flannel pajamas, I knew that sweet was the wrong answer. An electrical fire smells like hot pennies and scorched hair and old dust cooking. This smelled like fruit that had been left too long in a warm truck. I sat up in the dark and started counting my own breaths, because counting is what I do when I am afraid. The hallway switch did nothing when I hit it, and that told me the panel was already gone. My eyes had not confirmed a single thing yet, but my hands had. I went for the rear door first, because the rear door is 19 steps closer to the driveway. The knob turned all the way, and the door moved about 1/4 of an inch. Then it stopped the way a door stops when something on the outside is holding it. I pulled twice with my shoulder behind it, and the door did not give me anything. I am 59 years old, and I still have a tradesman's back, and it made no difference that night. Smoke was already running along the ceiling in a flat gray sheet above my head. So I turned around and went out through the front of my own house in the dark. That decision is the only reason there is anybody here telling you this. On the way out, I took 2 things, and I have thought about that choice every single day since. I took the brass lighter from the shirt on the chair and put it in my left chest pocket. Then I took 1 boot off the mat, a left-foot garden boot, because that is what my hand found. I did not take a coat, a wallet, a photograph, or the second boot. A man in a burning house is not a man making good decisions. The rain outside was 39 degrees, and it came down hard and steady across the yard. I stood in the wet grass in pajamas and 1 boot, and watched the northeast corner of my house open up. The fire came out of the service panel wall first, which is exactly where I would have told you it started. Orange light went up the transmission poles at the property line and made them look like nothing I recognized. 62 acres of my life stood there and glowed, and the rain did not slow it down at all. I dialed 911 at 2 hours 19 minutes past midnight with a phone that was already soaked through. I gave the address 41 Sable Road, Wexford Hollow, and I gave it twice to be certain. The woman asked me if anybody else was inside the residence with me. I told her no, there was nobody, there had not been anybody in that house for 9 years. The call ended at 41 seconds, and I know the number because I looked at the screen 100 times afterward. Coverage on Sable Road has always been poor, and a wet phone in cold rain is a dead phone. I tried 4 more times and got nothing back, but that flat tone that means the tower cannot hear you. Then I stood in the yard and waited for the sirens the way you wait for a lifted receiver. Our volunteer department can reach my gravel in 11 minutes on the worst night of the year. I counted to 400, and then I counted to 400 again, and the road stayed black. Nobody came. I want you to sit with that sentence because I sat with it for 3 hours in the rain. No engine, no tanker, no pickup with a red light on the dash, no headlights out on the county road. I did not understand it that night, and I made myself stop trying to understand it. A man standing in front of his burning house in one boot cannot afford a theory. So I started walking, and here's the geography of it, because the geography is the whole story. My sister lives 40 minutes north of me by truck, and I had no truck and no keys. My oldest friend lives 19 miles east, which is a full night of walking on any leg, let alone mine. My daughter lives 3 miles south on Route 9 in Thornfield Estates in Ash Grove City. She is my daughter, and 3 miles is 3 miles, so I went south. My left knee broke in 1998, and it has never once forgiven me for the repair. It fails on stairs, and it fails in cold, and Route 9 that night was nothing but cold. 3 miles should be 1 hour for a working man in decent boots and dry clothes. It took me 3 hours and 12 minutes in pajamas, 1 garden boot, and 1 soaked wool sock. Twice I sat down on the shoulder gravel and put both hands flat on my thigh until the leg answered. Thornfield Estates has a stone sign at the entrance and lawns cut to exactly the same width. Every portico light in that subdivision was burning, and not one window had a person behind it. I came up the drive at 12 Thornfield Court, and my hand left a gray smear on the white column. There was a car in the driveway that I did not know, parked nose out, still ticking as it cooled. I rang the bell at 5 hours 41 minutes past midnight, and I heard it sound inside the house. The door opened 4 inches and stopped there on the chain of her own arm. Through that gap I could see the kitchen counter and half a birthday cake under the light. The party had been the night before, and I had not been told about it or asked to it. My daughter looked at my pajamas and at the 1 boot and at the ash running off me. "You are dripping ash on my rug," she said. "The house is gone, Sloan," I said. "All of it. Call your insurance company. That is what you paid them for." I walked 3 miles. "You always land on your feet, Dad. Go land somewhere else." Behind her, a second shadow crossed the hallway light and stopped. I saw the width of a shoulder and nothing else, no face and no name. She did not turn around to look at it, and she did not need to. "Whose car is that in the drive?" I said. She took hold of her own left wrist. Then the door closed, and I heard the bolt slide home while I was still standing on the mat in 1 boot. I looked down at my hands and made myself stop counting the seconds. The shadow on the other side of that wood did not move away. It stayed exactly where it was for as long as I did. I stood on that mat until the shadow behind the door finally moved, and then I turned around and started walking again, because there was 1 more light on in Belhaven County at 5 hours and 45 minutes past midnight. The rain had turned into a thin ice that stung the back of my neck. My left knee had already quit on me twice that night. I put the bad leg down slowly on the driveway stones and went back out to the road. Route 9 at that hour is a black river with a white line painted down the middle of it. I walked the shoulder facing the traffic the way my father taught me. 3 trucks went past me and not one of them slowed down. The single boot on my left foot filled with water somewhere in the 2nd mile. Marrow Bend sits in a low place where 2 farm roads run into Ridge Street. Every window in that town was dark except 1. The porch light at Marrow Bend Chapel burns all night every night, and it has since before I stopped attending. I saw it from a 1/4 mile out, and I aimed myself at it like a man aims at a dock. Isaiah Bramble opened the door before I reached the top step. He has been the pastor there for 24 years, and he has a way of looking at a wrecked man without inspecting him. "The light stays on all night, Ellis. It always has. I did not know where else to walk to. You walked to the right place. Sit down. He keeps folding chairs stacked by the door for funerals and for potlucks. He opened one and set it near the radiator and did not ask me a single question. Then he brought a wool blanket and a cup of coffee that was too strong and exactly right. I sat in that chair for 2 hours while the windows went from black to gray. A man in my trade reads a room by looking at the wiring first. The chapel had old cloth wire behind the pulpit and a modern breaker box someone added later. I looked at that box for a long time because it was easier than looking at my own hands. My house on Sable Road had burned down to the service panel, and I did not let myself think past those 8 words. Junie came through the door a little after 8 in the morning, still in her coat, smelling like diesel and school bus heaters. She is my younger sister, 57 years old, and she has driven Route 12 for 24 years. She looked at the blanket and at the boot, and she started crying right there in the aisle. "She did not let you in," Junie said. "Say it out loud so I can hear you say it." "She did not let me in." Junie sat down in this chair beside me and held onto my sleeve like I might drift off. I did not cry. I have never been able to do that in front of people, and I am not proud of it. I looked down at my hands instead. They were gray to the wrist, and there was a split across the second knuckle that I did not remember getting. Junie had my truck in her yard, and that is the only reason I still had one. It is a 1997 dark green GMC Sierra plate number BH4172, and I had left it at her place 2 days earlier so she could haul feed. She put the keys on my knee without me asking. A man with no house and no shoes still owns something if he owns a truck. At 8 in the morning, I called Otis Duplantis from the phone in the chapel office. Otis was the volunteer fire chief of this county for 31 years, and he taught me to read burn patterns in 1996. He answered on the first ring, which is not a thing a man of 66 usually does at that hour. "Do not go back out there today, Hartwell. Give it a day. You have not asked me if anybody was hurt." There was a small pause on his end, no longer than a breath. Then he said he would meet me tomorrow, and he said the scene would still be there, and he hung up. I stood with my hand on that phone for a while afterward. He had known there was a fire before I told him, and that made sense because everything in this county travels by radio and by rumor. Still, the call was short. Otis has never in 31 years given me less than 10 minutes. Bramble came in with the bulletin board letters in his hand, the little white ones you slide into felt grooves. "What is the date today, Ellis? I have to change the board." "3rd of February, I said. I heard my own voice say it, and something in my chest went quiet and cold, the way a shop goes quiet when the main breaker drops. The keys were still in my hand, and the ring on them was the one Delia bought at a lake store. On the 3rd of February, in the year 2016, a fuel line let go on a boat out at Cranmore Lake, 9 miles west of where I was standing. My wife was on that boat. They never recovered her, and I refused to file for a death certificate for 4 years because signing a paper felt like agreeing with it. I did not say any of that to Bramble. He is a man who never asks a question twice, so he slid his letters into the felt and left me alone with it. Junie drove me down to the chapel basement, and I slept 4 hours on a cot beside the water heater. My knee ached all the way through the sleep. I had gone 9 years without saying that date out loud. It had taken a fire to make me say it, and I could not decide whether that was a coincidence or an appointment. The appointment, if that is what it was, kept me awake until 6 in the morning, so I was sitting in the blue kettle when Nita Alvarez turned the sign around at 8. The chapel basement cot had given me 4 hours and a knee that would not bend. I walked down Ridge Street in the dark and waited by the door like a delivery truck. Nita has waited tables in that diner for 6 years, and she has never once asked me why I look the way I look. She poured coffee before I asked for it, the way she does for everybody. I counted the stools while she worked. 9 of them red vinyl, 2 of them patched with tape. I count things when I am afraid, and I have done that since I was a boy. My hand stayed in my left chest pocket, turning the lighter over thumb, sliding across the base plate. "You want the eggs, Mr. Hartwell, or do you want to just sit?" she said. "Sit," I said. "I am waiting on Otis." She wrote something on the spiral pad anyway, because a full pad looks like a full morning. Then she said the thing that changed the shape of my whole week, and she said it like weather. "They went east, Mr. Hartwell." I remember because my brother was driving. I set the cup down very carefully. East on Ridge Street is away from Wexford Hollow. My house sits west out past the transmission line, and every engine in this county should have come through town going west that night. I asked her what time. She turned the pad around and printed it in pencil for me, 2 in the morning, engines east. She remembers vehicles better than faces, which in a town this size is a kind of public record. I folded the sheet and put it in my shirt behind the lighter. Otis Duplantis came in at 20 minutes after 8, with the green thermos under his arm. He ran the volunteer department in Belhaven County for 31 years, and he taught me to read fire in 1996. He is the only man who ever taught me that, and I am the only man he ever taught it to. He sat down, moved a wooden toothpick to the corner of his mouth, and poured his own coffee out of his own thermos. "Hey, Barn," he said before I asked. "Ridge Cut Road. Went up at 1 hour 50 minutes past midnight. Whole department rolled on it." "That is 22 miles out," I said. 22 and a half. Nobody hurt. Barn was empty. Owner has not filed a claim, and nobody has bothered to put a cause on the paper. I sat with that, while the grill hissed behind the counter. My house went up 24 minutes after that barn did, and every truck in the county was already standing in a field on the other side of the corridor. I asked him why a hay barn in February wet through from 3 weeks of rain would light itself at that hour of the night. "Hay barns burn Hartwell," he said. "They burn every winter. Not at 1 hour 50 minutes in the morning, 22 miles from my house." He looked at the window instead of at me. I heard my own teacher in my own mouth, then the first lesson he ever gave me, standing in a wet field with a flashlight. Fire tells you where it started. People never do. He said that back in 1996 about a feed store, and I had repeated it for 30 years as trade talk, the way a man repeats anything he does not expect to need. At 11 in the morning, I drove out to what was left of 41 Sable Road. 62 acres, and in the middle of it, a black rectangle holding standing water. Rain had knocked the smell down into the ground, where it could sit and wait. Hollis Pruitt was their county fire marshal, 18 years in the job, a man who came up under Otis on the volunteer department. The fire marshal is the county official with the legal authority over a fire scene, which means nothing gets moved, cleared, or released until he signs for it. He photographed the same corner twice, which is what he does with everything, and then he walked over and shook my hand like a neighbor. "It is going down as undetermined for now," he said. "That is not an accusation, and it is not a clearance." "I wired that panel myself in March," I said. "I used copper, and I used the right box." Otis stood behind us near the driveway with the thermos in both hands. "Fires do not care what you used," he said. "I walked the slab anyway." 34 years in the trade puts a map in your legs, and I did not need a wall to know where I was. I went through the kitchen that was not there, past the hall, and down to the northeast corner where the service panel had hung on a stub of conduit. The point of origin is the exact location where a fire began, and every honest man on that slab agreed it was that corner. Then I knelt down in the wet ash with my bad knee, complaining, and I looked at the burn pattern. A burn pattern is the mark fire leaves in the material, and it tells you direction and speed, the way a current tells you which way a river runs. An electrical failure inside a panel burns outward and upward from a tight point, and the deepest damage stays close to the metal. This pattern did not do that. The char ran low and wide across the floor line and pushed toward the panel from the room side, and it burned hardest where there was nothing to burn. I stayed down there about 2 minutes, and I did not say one word about it to Pruitt. When I stood up, I noticed something else. Otis had stood in the same square of gravel for 40 minutes. He had not moved, and he had not once looked into the pit. I asked him to come look at the northeast corner with me. He said his knee was worse than mine that day. In 31 years, he had never mentioned his knee. A man who will not look into a hole has already decided what is in it, so, on the morning of the 5th of February, I went looking for paper instead of people. The Belhaven County Records Office sits on Ridge Street in Marrow Bend, behind a door that sticks in wet weather. I got there at 9 in the morning, and I was the first person through it. Paper does not invent a bad knee. Paper does not stand in the gravel for 40 minutes without looking down. The counter in that office is oak, and the rubber stamp is chained to it like a pen at a bank. One fluorescent tube hangs over the public terminal, and it has been failing since the year that terminal was new. That year was 2011. The whole room smells like toner and old carpet glue, and it has smelled that way since I first signed something there in 1994. Marlon Feist has worked that counter for 22 years. He is 68 years old, and he is the county notary as well as the records clerk. He keeps a handwritten notary journal, a hardbound book with a green cover and a cloth spine. That morning it sat closed by his elbow while we talked. I did not look at it twice, and I had no reason to, and I have thought about that a great many times since. Utilities and permits, I told him. 41 Sable Road, Wexford Hollow, going back 3 years. He did not ask me why. A man whose house has burned does not have to explain himself in a county this size. He brought the file in a gray folder and set it on the oak between us. Electric service history. A well permit from 2009. A driveway culvert approval I had forgotten paying for. I read it the way I read a panel school, top to bottom, one line at a time, expecting nothing. Then I reached a single sheet that did not belong to my life. It was a service inspection work order, number BH3320. It was dated the 27th of January, 2025, which is 7 days before my house burned down. The scope of work was one line, and that line named the Northeast Service Panel. That is the exact spot the fire marshal had marked as the point of origin, meaning the one place where the burning began before it traveled anywhere else. I stood there with my thumb on that sheet, and I counted the letters in the company name. Ironwood Property Services, LLC. 19 letters. I count things when I am afraid, and I have done it since I was a boy, and I did it standing at a public counter under a bad fluorescent tube. You did not order this, Ellis, Feist said. I did not order anything, I said. I have not ordered a service call on my own house in 34 years. I am the man they used to call. Well, somebody did, and somebody signed it. I turned the sheet toward the light. The signature block was not a name. It was one letter, a capital K, leaning hard to the right, with a hook on the tail that curled backward instead of forward. No first name. No printed line under it. No license number, which every honest contractor in this state puts on paper without being asked. That is not a signature, I said. That is a letter. Feist put on his reading glasses and looked at it for a long moment. Then he went to the terminal and typed with 2 fingers, the way men his age type when they learned late and refused to be embarrassed about it. Ironwood Property Services was registered to a parent company called Kestrel Ridge Holdings. He wrote that name on a slip of scratch paper and slid it across the oak to me. Kestrel Ridge has filed in this county 6 times since 2019, he said. Deeds mostly. Buildings nobody wanted. I asked him to run the copier for me. I did not know any other way to keep a thing like that. He charged me $1.50, and he stamped the copy as a true record, and the stamp came down with a sound like a stapler in an empty church. The front door stuck and then gave, and a woman came in out of the cold. She wore a gray wool coat, buttoned to the throat, and she was maybe 60 and carrying nothing. She did not take off her gloves. She did not touch the counter or the pen or the stack of blank forms sitting in the tray. She stood 2 steps back from the oak like a person who has learned to keep her hands to herself in rooms full of paper. She looked at Feist and not at me, and she asked one question. How long has it been since you showed anyone your deed? Feist said something polite that I did not catch because I was still holding my own copy. She nodded once. Then she walked back out into the wet morning without filing anything, without signing anything, and without leaving one mark on that office. The whole thing took under a minute. Who was that? I said. She comes in about twice a year, Feist said. She never files anything. I have replayed that minute more times than I can put a number to. At the time she was a stranger in a coat, and I was a tired man with a folder, and she meant nothing to me at all. I would not learn her name for 35 days. When I finally did, I understood that she had asked me nothing because I was not worth a question yet. I stayed at that counter until 4 in the afternoon and pulled everything the county had on my own address. Then I folded the copy of work order BH3320 and put it in my left shirt pocket against the lighter. On the drive back down Route 9, I realized I had been reading it wrong the whole time. It was not a printed letter standing in for a company. Somebody had written it by hand. A handwritten letter is a person, not a company. So on the 7th of February, I went to see the only person in Belhaven County who had ever read my paperwork out loud to me. Yolanda Crisp keeps an elder law practice on Ridge Street, 1 floor, 1 door, no sign worth reading. She has been my attorney since 2014, which makes 11 years of my life sitting in her binders. She has practiced for 31 years, and she still refuses to use electronic mail of any kind. Her office is kept at 64 degrees in every season because she says warm rooms make people sign things. I sat down in a wooden chair, and my left knee told me the weather was not finished with me. The wall behind her desk was black binders floor to ceiling, each spine labeled in her own square handwriting. She poured a cup of coffee she never drank and pulled one binder without looking at the label. You called about a work order, she said. We will come to that in a minute. It is for my own house, I said. It is dated 7 days before the fire. Then it is not the first thing, she said. It is the second thing. She opened the binder flat and turned it so the print faced her instead of me. Yolanda Crisp reads every document aloud before she signs it, and she reads them aloud to her clients as well. She began at the top of the first page with the date the way a woman reads a hymn in a cold chapel. I had heard those pages before. I had never once listened to them. The Hartwell Family Trust was funded in April of 2015. It held $74 million. That money came from the sale of Hartwell and Ferraro Electric in November of 2014 for $48 million, plus the 62 acres in Wexford Hollow, sitting under a transmission corridor. 34 years of conduit panel work and burned hands read out loud in one paragraph. You and Bryce Vandermeer are named co-trustees, she said. Co-trustee means two people hold legal authority over the property of the trust. Neither one of you can move a dollar alone. Sloan and Poppy are the beneficiaries, which means they are the ones entitled to receive. I knew that. I had signed that in a good year, when a son-in-law still looked like a gift. My hands were flat on my knees, and I noticed that I had begun counting the binders on her wall. There were 51 of them. Counting is what I do when something in a room is wrong and I have not found it yet. Then she closed that binder and opened a thing that was not a binder at all. It was a school notebook with a soft cover filled front to back in her own square handwriting, and her voice changed in a way I did not like. "Mr. Hartwell, well, you did not just sign an amendment," she said. "A trust amendment is a signed change to the terms of a trust. It takes effect the moment it is executed, not the day it is filed with anybody." She had told me that in December, and I had nodded the way a man nods at a doctor. She read the date aloud, the 18th of December, 2024. The amendment removed Bryce Vandermeer as co-trustee. It named me alone. I remembered wanting that. I remembered a quiet argument at a kitchen table about a signature he wanted and did not get. What I did not remember was the second instruction, and she read that one slowly twice. "You told me to file a complaint with the State Insurance Commissioner on the 11th of February, she said. "That is 4 days from now." I sat there in a room kept at 64 degrees and felt the cold arrive late. "And the paper that says so was in the floor safe," I said. "What I am reading you is my notebook," she said. "I write down what a client tells me, and I write down what I put in his document, and then I hand him the only signed copy there is. I do not keep originals, I do not photocopy them, and I do not use electronic mail. That paper was notarized once in this office, and it was never filed with any court. You took it home. You told me you had a floor safe under the pantry." I did the arithmetic backward while she was still talking, and the arithmetic was the whole trouble. The 11th of February was the appointment. The 3rd of February was the fire. The 27th of January was a service inspection at my address that I never requested. Somewhere in that stretch of 7 days, a man with a slanted letter K had written my house down on a form. "Can you file without it?" I asked. "No," she said. "A notebook is not a signature. I can tell any judge in this state what that paper said, and he will thank me and rule against me. There is no copy of it anywhere on this earth, Ellis, and that is the way you and I built it." I left Ridge Street a little after 11 and drove Route 9 with the heater roaring at my boots. By 3 in the afternoon, I was at the gate of Thornfield Estates in Ashgrove City, which is brick and iron, and a call box that decides who is a person. I did not go in. I only wanted to hear my daughter say my name through a speaker, and I had not earned even that much yet. Poppy was standing inside the bars with her backpack on both shoulders, waiting for the afternoon bus. She is 7 years old. She is missing a front tooth, and she is the only person alive who calls me Sparky. She is also the only child I have ever known who draws with 2 crayons held in one hand at the same time. "Sparky, I drew you the thing Daddy said on the phone," she said, and pushed a folded paper through the bars. It was a blue house with a square door. Beside the house stood a man holding a red can. Above the roof there was a red flame. "I did the fire after," she said. "The first red was gone by then." That night I held the drawing up to the light in Junie's kitchen. My granddaughter had used 2 different reds, and only one of them had been on the paper when she folded it. A 7-year-old cannot draw a fire before it happens, so at first light, on the 8th of February, I drove back out to the only place that could tell me when she drew it. The rain had quit in the night and left the county the color of wet cardboard. My left knee did not care for the cold, and it complained at every rut in the gravel. 41 Sable Road was a slab with standing water on it, and a smell that would not leave. The house I framed at 33 years old was a floor plan drawn in charcoal. I counted the floor joists that were still recognizable because counting is what I do when I am afraid. I counted 9. I had borrowed a garden sieve from my sister's shed before sunrise. Junie Hartwell Boone has driven a school bus in this county for 24 years, and she keeps a spare key under a brick that everybody knows about. She did not ask what a man wants with a sieve in February. She only handed it over and told me to wear the gloves, and I did not wear the gloves. I knelt down in the northeast corner, and I started sifting by hand. The northeast corner is where the fire marshal put the point of origin, which is the exact spot where a fire begins. Everything else in a burned house is only the story that Spot tells afterward. I wanted to hear it in my own language, and my language is copper and conduit and load. The work is slow, and it is stupid, and it is the only honest thing I did that week. You scoop, you shake, you spread the wet ash across a screen, and you look at what does not fall through. Water came up through my knees, and my hands went the color of old nickels. 5 hours went by that way, and I did not notice one of them leaving. At noon, the Siev gave me the sill plate. The sill plate is the flat board that sits between the foundation and the wall framing, and it is usually the last thing to burn. Across 2 feet of it, there was a hardened line, black and glassy, straight as a chalk snap. Fire does not do that. Fire wanders, fire climbs, fire eats where the air is best. Otis Duplantis taught me to read burn patterns in 1996, standing over a burned tractor shed with his thermos in one hand. A burn pattern is the mark that tells you which way the fire traveled and how fast it moved. A straight line means a hand. A straight line means someone poured an accelerant, which is any substance used to make a fire spread faster than it wants to. I put my face down close to the board like a fool. Under the wet ash, there was something sweet, almost like orange peel left in a warm truck. It was the smell that pulled me out of sleep on the 3rd of February in green flannel pajamas. I sat back on my heels in the standing water, and I said it where nobody could hear me. "This is arson," I said. "Say it out loud, Ellis. Arson is the crime of setting fire to property on purpose. It is a plain word, and it took me 5 days to put it in my mouth. Saying it changed the shape of the morning. It meant somebody had driven out here and parked and worked and driven home to a warm bed. 20 minutes later, the screen caught something that was not wood and was not glass. It was a curved piece of housing about the size of a bottle cap with a stub of copper lead melted into it. I have set timers on well pumps and yard lights for 34 years. I know the shape of a thing that is built to wait, and this thing had been built to wait. I held it up to the gray light, and the sweet smell was on that too. Then I did what nobody had told me not to do because there was nobody to tell me. I walked to the truck, dumped the coffee out of a blue can I kept for hardware, and dropped both pieces in with my bare fingers. A man in a courtroom would spend an entire afternoon on that decision later. If you have ever handed your trust to somebody and had it come back with the corners cut, stay with me. What happened in that corner was evidence. What happened that evening was the part that still costs me. Junie came down the row with a paper sack when the light started to go flat. "You have been out there 5 hours, and you have not eaten," she said. "I found the corner," I told her. She drew the corner. That was the moment it landed on me. My granddaughter had drawn a blue house with a square door, a man with a red can and a flame added afterward in a second shade of red. She repeats what adults say word for word without knowing what any of it means. She had been standing somewhere while a grown man described this exact corner on a telephone, and I was kneeling in it with wet ash to my elbows. The room above Junie's garage has a cot, a space heater, and one window that faces the road. That night, I set the blue can on the floor beside the cot and took my blood pressure pill at 9. In 3 days, a complaint was due at the state insurance commissioner, and I already understood I was not going to make that appointment. The hay barn on Ridgecut Road had burned the same night, and I finally knew why. Otis came up the outside stairs a little after 9 with the green thermos and a toothpick working in his teeth. He has been my friend for 31 years, and he was the volunteer fire chief of this county for all of them. He looked at my hands, and he looked at the floor near the cot. "You find anything out there today, Hartwell?" he said. "No," I said. "Nothing worth carrying home." He waited a second longer than a man usually waits. "That is probably for the best," he said. It was the first time in 31 years I had lied to Otis Duplantis, and I did not know why I had done it. My mouth had gotten there before my head agreed to go. I found out that I had been right long before I found out that I had been smart. I went back out to Sable Road on the 9th of February to prove to myself that the lie had been worth telling, and by noon I wished I had never gone. I got there at 7 in the morning, with the frost still gray on the gravel. The 1997 GMC Sierra sat where the driveway used to widen, plate BH4172. My left knee hated the cold and said so on the first step down. The house was gone the way houses go. What was left was a slab, a stack of black studs, and a smell that rain cannot wash out of a place. People had been through it already and marked what they cared about with small orange flags. Not one flag stood at the back of the structure. That was what I had come for. On the night of the fire, the rear door did not move. I pushed it, then I put my shoulder into it. Then I quit and went out the front. For 6 days I had told myself that heat swells a frame and binds a door. For 6 days I had not once asked the harder question, which was why. I walked the outside line first, the way a tradesman walks a job before he touches anything. The front northeast corner was where the fire had begun, and even a man with no training could see it. In my trade, we call that the point of origin, which means the exact spot where a fire started, not where it burned hottest. Everything after that spot is just the fire telling you which way it traveled. The marks on the standing studs told the second half of the story. A burn pattern is the shape fire leaves behind on wood and metal, and it reads like an arrow if you are patient. The char ran low and wide at the northeast corner and climbed as it moved south and west. Otis taught me to read those marks in 1996, standing in a soybean field with a flashlight in his teeth. The rear frame was still up in a section, maybe 4 feet of it, leaning under a fallen run of roof, sheathing. I got down on the wet slab and went in on my elbows because my knee would not fold the other way. It was dark under in a thick, close way that the morning could not reach. I took the brass lighter out of my left chest pocket and struck it and held it low. The flame steadied. At the base of the frame, driven in from the outside, was a galvanized shim about 6 inches long. Somebody had hammered it under the sill and then bent the tail of it over the way you set a wedge that you do not want walking back out. It was clean metal under the soot. It had not been there when I went to bed. "Somebody drove this in," I said out loud, to nobody in a burned house at 7:30 in the morning. I said the rest of it too because the first part did not seem to be enough. Somebody stood right here. I worked the shim loose with my pocket knife and a rock, and it took me 11 minutes. Then I backed out into the gray light and sat down on the wet slab with the thing in my hand. I am a man who counts when he is afraid, and I counted the orange flags twice and got 19 both times. My hands were steadier than they had any right to be, and I remember looking at them and being ashamed of how calm they were. Then I did the math and the math is simple when you do it in trade terms. The fire started at the front northeast corner, which is the side a man sleeping in that house would have to cross to reach the front door. The back exit, the only other way out of the building, was closed from the outside with a wedge, and every truck in the volunteer department was 22 miles away on Ridge Cut Road that night, chasing a hay barn that no one ever claimed. Arson is the crime of intentionally setting fire to property, and for 6 days that was the word I had been carrying. It is a property offense. It is about a building and a policy and a payout. Nobody sets a fire that way for money. You do not seal the back of a house to collect on the front of it. I stayed on that slab longer than a sensible man would. The word for what I was holding was not a word about a house at all. At 1 in the afternoon, I was northbound on Route 9 with the shim in a paper sack on the seat beside me. I called my sister from the road because Junie drives a school bus, and she keeps her spare key under a brick that the whole county knows about. "Do not open the door for anybody tonight," I said. "Ellis, you are scaring me," she said. "Say a real sentence." "The back door was wedged shut from the outside," I said. She did not answer for 4 or 5 seconds, and I could hear her kitchen radio behind her. "Then that was not about the house," she said. "No," I said. "It was not about the house." 6 miles out of Marrow Bend, a white pickup with no front plate came off a side road and settled in behind me. It stayed there. I ran 55 and it ran 55. I ran 48 up the grade past the Cranmore turn, and it ran 48 and never crowded me once. Flat gray, light 2 lanes, wet fields, and a set of headlights holding the same distance mile after mile. On the 3rd of February, my oldest friend of 31 years had told me to wait a day before I went back out to that scene. I did not think about that on Route 9. I thought about it later, and later is a hard place to think. When I pulled into the Quarry Bend turnout, the white pickup went on by without slowing. I never saw a face. I never saw a hand on the wheel. The truck behind me held 31 miles without ever trying to catch me, and I could not think of a single person who knew where I had been that morning. Then I could think of one. 11 February was the day my lawyer was supposed to file a complaint with the state insurance commissioner. And since the paper for it had burned, I spent that morning 41 miles away in a federal building instead. The drive to Delmar City took an hour and 10 minutes on wet asphalt. I carried a blue coffee can on the passenger seat with a folded work order beside it. The field office sat behind a low wall of concrete planters meant to look like landscaping. Inside there was a metal detector, a guard with a clipboard, and a visitor log on a steel counter. I signed my name at 9 hours 4 minutes in the morning and printed my reason for the visit. I wrote the words "possible arson and insurance fraud" in the small box they gave me. Agent, 14 years of service, most of it on money cases out of Delmar City. She took me to a conference room with nothing on the walls. Pike did not sit down, and she never sat down the entire time I was in that room. She stood at the end of the table with a stack of index cards in her hand. She wrote on them in short lines and turned each finished card face down. I counted 9 cards before she asked me anything. "When did you last touch the panel yourself, and what did you use?" she said. I told her I had pulled the cover in November with a Torx screwdriver and a meter. "Who knew the house would be empty on the 3rd of February?" she said. "Nobody," I said. "That is the part that keeps me awake." Her third question is the one I have carried ever since. "Has anyone asked you for the original of a signed document in the last 90 days? I said one man had in December, and that I did not hand it over. She wrote that on a card and turned the card face down like the others. I opened the blue coffee can on the table and let her look without touching it. Inside was a scorched timer fragment and a hardened line of accelerant on a scrap of subfloor. Accelerant is any substance a person uses to make a fire spread faster than it should. Beside it, I laid work order BH 3320 for an inspection I never requested. Then the door opened, and a man came in with an empty leather folder under his arm. He said he was Curtis Lomax's Assistant Special Agent in Charge, 27 years of service. He sat down and set the folder squarely in front of him, and never opened it. "Walk me through it, Chief," he said. I gave him the point of origin at the northeast service panel and the timer. I gave him the rear door of my own house wedged shut from the outside. I gave him a work order signed with a slanted capital K that no man would claim. He listened for 11 minutes, and he did not write down one single word. "Here is the trouble, Chief," he said. "A house fire is a state matter." I explained that arson is a state offense charged by the county and tried in the county. He said the federal government needs mail fraud or wire fraud to come through that door. Mail fraud and wire fraud mean using the mail or an interstate transmission to carry out a scheme to defraud. "You bring me mail fraud and wire fraud with a pattern, I will open a file the same day," I said. A barn burned 22 miles off and pulled the whole department away that night. He said the county fire marshal had my fire listed as undetermined. He said undetermined is not a crime and that a grieving man hears music in static. Then he stood up and did the thing I still see when I close my eyes. He picked up the blue coffee can still full and put it back into my hands. He did not log it. He did not photograph it. He did not sign a receipt. "I brought you a timer," I said. "You brought me a coffee can. Take it with you, Chief." Pike did not look up from her cards while it happened. She did not look up when he left, and she did not look up when I stood. I carried that can back past the visitor log, and my hands were steady. They had no business being steady. I did not drive back toward Marrow Bend that evening. My sister keeps a spare key under a brick that every soul in the county knows about. I was not going to park my truck in her driveway and hang a sign on her. So I went north on Route 9, 40 minutes to Quarry Bend. The Pine Hollow Motor Lodge had 11 units in a row and a chain lock on every door. I took room 11 and signed the register in my own name because a false one felt like guilt. I ate a sandwich in the truck and took my blood pressure pill at 9 at night. Then I went in and turned on the lamp beside the bed. There was a photograph lying face up on the pillow. It was a photograph of me taken through a windshield, standing on the slab at Sable Road. I knew the day by my coat and by the light, the 8th of February. I turned it over with 2 fingers. 4 words were written on the back in pencil. The letters leaned backward the way letters lean when a left hand pushes them across paper. "Stop digging alone, Ellis." I sat down on the end of that bed and looked at my hands. I had known that slant since 1989 on grocery lists and birthday cards. The woman who made it had been gone 9 years since the 3rd of February. I carried that photograph in my coat for 3 days before I did what the handwriting told me to do, and on the afternoon of 14 February, I drove out to a cabin we had rented one summer in 2003. The north shore of this Quarry Bend lake was gray and flat and empty. I parked on the gravel and shut the truck door quietly out of an old habit. My left knee locked on the 2 steps up to the porch the way it always does in cold. The door was not locked. Smoke came off the stovepipe thin and steady, so somebody had fed the wood stove within the hour. I counted the boards on the porch before I went in because counting is what I do instead of praying. There were 11. Inside, there were 2 chairs at the table, and one of them faced the door. She was sitting in that one the way she has sat in every room since the year we met. Her hair was shorter and gray, and her hands were folded in front of her. Along her right forearm, there was a burn scar that had not been there in 2016. On the floor beside the chair sat 3 cardboard boxes with the flaps folded shut. Neither of us touched the other for 20 minutes, and I want that understood. There was no running across the room. There was a wood stove ticking, and a man standing in a doorway with his coat still buttoned. "You still keep the left side empty," she said. That was the first thing my wife said to me after 9 years. She meant the bed at the motor lodge, and she meant every bed before it. "Counting," I said. I sat down in the chair that faced the wall because she had taken the other one. My hands were shaking, so I put them flat on the table where I could watch them. "Our daughter grew up without a mother, and you let her," I said. She did not flinch, and she did not raise her voice because she never has. "I did not choose the water, Ellis," she said. "I chose what to do after it." Then she told me about the 3rd of February 2016 at Cranmore Lake. The fuel line on that boat did not fail. It was built to fail on a schedule. She was in the water 40 minutes before a man in a flat-bottom boat took hold of her coat. He was not a rescuer. He had been sent to be certain of the work, and what he said to her face. If she ever surfaced, they would take me first so that she could watch, and then her. So she stayed dead. That was her phrase and not mine. She stayed dead, and she worked 9 years with no badge and no paycheck and no name on anything. She talked for a while about insurable interest in the abstract, the way she used to at our kitchen table. Insurable interest is the rule that says a person may only insure a life when that death would truly cost him something. When that rule is broken, she said somebody is being fitted for a policy the way a man is fitted for a suit. Then she told me that the December amendment had been her idea. The file that arrived at the office of Yolanda Crisp last autumn carried no name on it. She had mailed it, and she had never spoken one word to the woman. A trust amendment removes a co-trustee the moment it is signed and notarized. Filing it is only a courtesy. "They picked 3 February, she said. 9 years to the day. That is not a coincidence, that is a signature." I sat with the date I had been trying not to look at for 11 days. The house began burning on the 9th anniversary of the morning. She went into that water. A man who sets fires for money does not care about anniversaries. A man who sends a message does. She had been 200 yards behind me since the morning of the 3rd of February. She had watched me stand on that wet slab, and she had not come. She came in on the 14th for one reason, and she said it plainly. I had started digging the northeast corner myself, where the accelerant had gone down. An accelerant is a substance used to make a fire spread faster and hotter than it would on its own. Once I began turning that corner over with my own hands, I was already dead if she stayed out. "That is not affection," she said. "That is arithmetic." I did not forgive her. I want that on the record as well. A man can understand a thing completely and still not forgive it. Then she asked me to put the lighter on the table. I took it out of my left chest pocket and set it down between us. "Do you remember the week in January you left it at the hardware store in Marrow Bend?" she said. I did. The 22nd. The wick was burned down to nothing, and I picked it up again at 4 in the afternoon. "Turn it over," she said. I turned it over. She reached across and pressed the base plate with her thumb. The plate came away in her hand, and that plate had never once come away in mine. Underneath, in a hollow, the depth of a dime, lay a chip of black plastic the size of a fingernail. 256 gigabytes. 9 years of her work. It had ridden in my shirt pocket since the 22nd of January. It had been there through 3 miles of freezing rain, and through every hour since. I looked down at my hands on that table, and they had gone perfectly still. She would not tell me why she had waited until after the fire to hand it to me. She said only that we would need one more person before any of it counted for anything. "You are not going to like who," she said. "Before I tell you who was sitting by that wood stove waiting for me, the man I trusted for 31 years, do something for me. Type the number 31 in the comments so I know you're still here beside me. And please note, the part that follows contains fictional elements and may not have unfolded exactly this way. If that's not for you, feel free to step away right here." She was right that I would not like it, and she was wrong about the reason, because I had already known for 5 days and had been refusing to finish the sentence. It sat in me the way a bad splice sits behind a wall. You can smell it long before you find it. I drove east out of Quarry Bend with the heater going, and my left knee stiffening in the cold. Delia rode with me and did not say his name once. She sat facing the windshield, with her hands flat on her knees. 19 miles east of Marrow Bend, the gravel turns to a lane with no line painted on it. I stopped at the end of it at 8 hours and 40 minutes at night on the 14th of February. The porch boards were the same boards I had helped him lay in the summer of 2004. I did not knock. I had never knocked at that house in 31 years, and I was not going to start on the night I lost it. The door gave under my hand, and the heat from the wood stove came out at me like a hand on the chest. Otis Duplantis was sitting in the chair beside the stove, with a wooden toothpick in the corner of his mouth. The green thermos was on the floor by his boot with the cup off, and I could tell from how it sat that it was empty. He looked at me, and he did not stand up. A man who is surprised stands up. I did not accuse him. I have thought about that a great deal since, and I believe it was the only dignified thing I did that whole winter. I walked past him to the shelf where the volunteer department trophies stood in a row, brass and cheap wood, 31 years of them. At the end of the row, a picture frame lay face down on the shelf, and the dust had built up around it in a clean rectangle. I picked it up and turned it over and set it standing where it belonged. Wade Duplantis looked back at me in a tan jumpsuit against a painted block wall. I had co-signed a loan for that young man in 2009, and neither of us had ever said one word about it since. That was the whole accusation. I did not have to open my mouth. Otis took the toothpick out and held it between 2 fingers and looked at the stove. "I did not sell you Hartwell," he said. "I bought my son." "With me," I said. "Yes, with you." He told it flat, the way he used to call a scene in Over the Radio. Wade is 4 years into a 9-year federal sentence for wire fraud, which is the offense of using telephone lines or electronic transfers to carry out a scheme to cheat people out of money. 14 months ago, a man sat down in the chair I was standing beside. Otis said the man had a shiny burn scar across the back of his left hand, and that the man never gave a name and never took a drink. He said 9 years could be 4, Otis said. "You have a daughter, Hartwell. I have a son. What would you have given them?" I did not answer him because the honest answer was not one I wanted to hear out loud. He said all he ever had to do was answer his telephone when it rang and say where I had been that day, where I ate, what time I left the property, whether the truck was at the house. He said he never touched a match, and he said he did not know about the wedge on the rear door. He said that last part twice. I believed him about half and half is a terrible place to keep a friend of 31 years. While he talked, I did what I have always done in a strange room, which is read the wiring first. There was a desk under the window with a document scanner on the corner of it. The cord lay coiled beside the outlet and had never been pushed into it. The dust on the lid was thick enough to write my initials in, and I understood then that somebody had told him to photograph papers for them and that he had never once done it. "That is obstruction of justice," I said. "That is what you did." "No, chum," he said. "There was no federal proceeding to obstruct back then, so that is not the word. Do not give me a clean word. I helped them. Say it that way." The Zippo was back in my left chest pocket, and it weighed nothing at all, now hollow where the chip had ridden for 23 days. I put my thumb against it through the flannel and counted the trophies on the shelf. There were 9 of them. I count things when I am frightened, and I was frightened, though not of him. "You taught me to read burn patterns in '96, I said. "You put my hand on the wall and made me feel which way the heat ran." "I did." "Fire tells you where it started. People never do." He nodded slowly and put the toothpick back in his mouth. He did not argue and he did not apologize. He asked me if I wanted coffee, which was the saddest thing said in that house because the thermos on the floor had been empty since morning. I have known men to beg better than that. I did not hit him. I want that written down plainly because there was a version of me in that room that wanted to, and he stayed in the chair by the stove where he belonged. I walked to the door and put my hand on the frame and turned around one time. "Wade gets out in 5 years either way," I said. "What do you get?" He had no answer for me. I left his door standing open behind me on purpose, and the cold went in past me toward the stove. Delia was waiting in the truck with the engine running. When I told her what he had said, she did not look surprised, and she did not look angry. She looked like a woman who had just been handed the last thing she needed. What she needed Otis for was not a confession, it was a name, and over the 4 days that followed, she spread 9 years across a kitchen table and taught me what my son-in-law actually did for a living. The cabin at Quarry Bend has one window over the sink and a table that seats 4 people. She sat facing the door the entire time, the way she has sat since before I married her. I sat where she put me with my back to the stove and my coffee going cold at my elbow. She worked left-handed, and the pencil came toward her body instead of away from it. On the first morning, she laid out deeds and county transfer records in long rows. On the second morning, she laid out policy declarations, which are the front pages that say what a policy is worth. On the third morning, she laid out fire reports, and the rows started to line up like a fence. By the fourth morning, I could not see the wood of that table anywhere. There were 3 cardboard boxes on the floor beside her chair, soft at the corners from being carried. I took my lighter out of my chest pocket and set it on the yellow legal pad so the top sheet would quit lifting every time the door was opened. She wrote 2 words on that pad while I watched her, and the 2 words were 3 boxes. "I am a man who reads a room by looking at the wiring first, and paper has never been my trade." She used words like layered placement and premium financing, and I nodded like a fool for an hour. Finally, I put both hands flat on the table and stopped her in the middle of a sentence. "Say it without any of your words," I said. She set the pencil down. She did not raise her voice because she has never once raised her voice at me in 35 years. "They buy old buildings nobody wants," she said. "They insure them for 4 times what they are worth. Then they burn them and somebody signs a check. 4 days of paper, and it fit in 3 sentences a man could carry in his shirt." Then she said the 4th sentence, and she said it slower than the first 3. "Sometimes there is a person inside. Those pay the most." The refrigerator kicked on behind me, and I counted the seconds until it stopped, because counting is what I do when I am frightened. I got to 19. Outside, the lake was flat and gray, and the wind was coming off it in short pushes. "How many of those have there been?" I asked. "I have 3 boxes," she said. "I have never been able to count past what is in the 3 boxes." Then she explained the law to me the way you explain a breaker panel to a homeowner. Insurable interest means you are only allowed to insure something whose loss would actually hurt you. A beneficiary is the person the money goes to when the loss happens. Mail fraud and wire fraud are the federal offenses of using the United States mail or a wire crossing a state line to carry out a scheme to defraud. That last part, she said, is the only reason Washington can touch any of it at all. She said the organization on the paper is called Kestrel Ridge Holdings. She put the figure at $310 million in claims paid since 1991. She said the money moved through 34 shell entities across 23 states. A shell entity, she explained, is a company that owns things and does nothing, a name on a mailbox with a bank account behind it. She said the man who runs the work is named Lucian Rourke. She said he is a private equity principal, on paper 64 years old, and that he never drinks anything in a meeting. Then she said he has a shiny burn scar across the back of his left hand. I put my coffee down. I put it down carefully because 6 days earlier a man in a kitchen had described that exact hand to me while he chewed a toothpick and would not look up. Delia watched me do it and did not ask me what it meant, which is how I knew she already understood. She said there is a wife. She said the wife is named Marguerite Vandermeer Rourke, and that she is 62 years old. I said the middle name out loud before she could get any further. Vandermeer, I said. She is Bryce's mother, Delia said. It is printed on your daughter's marriage license in the county you were born in, and not one person in your family ever read that page. She has been retired from title insurance for years, and she holds no position anywhere in the structure. In 29 years of doing this work, I have never once been able to attach that woman to anything. I sat there and understood that I had eaten dinner in the same building as her at a wedding and had never learned her face. I asked her who else is named as a beneficiary anywhere in those boxes. She looked at the window over the sink for longer than the question deserved. Then she picked up the pencil and went back to a row of deeds she had already finished. On the 20th of February, I drove down Route 9 alone, and I did not tell her I was going. I parked 2 blocks off and walked to the chain-link fence on the public side of Ash Grove Elementary. It was 3 hours and 15 minutes past noon, and the doors came open, and the yard filled with noise. My knee ached the way it always aches in cold, and I hooked 2 fingers through the fence and held on. She came out in a red coat with her backpack riding low. She saw me from 30 feet away, and she stopped walking. Her hand started up the way a child's hand does, and her mouth opened around a word she never got to use. I shook my head one time very small, and she lowered her hand and turned and got on the bus. Not one word passed between us. The bus pulled out, and I stood there with my fingers still in the fence. In the parking lot on the far side, a woman in a gray wool coat stood beside a dark car and watched that bus until it turned. I had seen that coat once before at a records counter in Belhaven County, and I had thought nothing of it then. Delia had told me she could never attach the wife to anything. She had also never told me that the wife knew what school my granddaughter went to. I asked Delia on the morning of the 22nd of February how a woman she could not attach to anything happened to know which school bus to watch, and instead of answering, she went and got the second box. The cabin at Quarry Bend had 1 room and 1 table and a wood stove that ticked when it cooled. She set the box down and sat where she always sits, facing the door, with the lake window behind her right shoulder. Rain came off the water in a thin gray sheet I stood by the stove because my knee does not like a cold floor. She opened the laptop first. The corner of it was cracked, and the crack had been there for as long as I had known that machine. She turned it so the screen faced my chair, then she went into the box with her left hand and started pulling paper. "Sit down, Ellis," she said. "This part takes a while." I sat. She laid the pages out in a row the way a man lays out fuses before he starts a job. State licensing records, employment history, registration filings from the securities regulator in this state, the kind of paper that says a person is legally allowed to handle other people's money. "Look at the year, Ellis," she said. "Not the wedding, the license." I read it twice because the first time I did not believe my own eyes. Bryce Vandermeer had been licensed as a private wealth advisor in 2013. Not 2014. Not after the wedding, not after he shook my hand in my own kitchen and called me sir. 2013, I said. We opened the sale negotiations in March of 2013. He was licensed 5 months later. 34 years in the trade teaches a man to trust a sequence. Power comes in, it goes through a panel, it goes out to a load. You do not argue with the order. The order here was March, then August, then everything that happened to my family. Hartwell and Ferraro Electric sold in November of 2014 for $48 million plus 62 acres sitting on a transmission corridor. Every man in the county knew that number before the ink dried. What I had never asked was who else knew it in March when the buyers first came to the table. Delia slid the next page across. It was a client registration record, the first one under his license in this state. The name on it belonged to a holding company. She had drawn a line under it in pencil and written the parent above it. Kestrel Ridge. His first client relationship, she said, before he ever met a single person in our family. I put both hands flat on the table. I do that when the floor feels less certain than it did a minute before. The wood was cold, and the grain ran the wrong way under my palms, and I counted the boards from the stove to the door. 11. She had one more page in that stack. It was a federal filing from 2009, an old inquiry that named a Kestrel Ridge subsidiary and then died quietly. Closed without action. No charges, no interviews, no explanation, just a stamp and a date. Somebody looked once, Delia said. Somebody stopped looking. Then she went back further to October of 2013. My daughter met her husband at an open house. She was 21 and licensed 1 year, and proud of the sign in the yard, and a young man in a good coat walked in without an appointment. Delia had the brokerage records for that listing. The brokerage had been bought 7 months before that open house. The buyer 3 layers down through paper companies that owned nothing but each other was Kestrel Ridge. I sat with that for a long minute. A house was chosen. A brokerage was chosen. A girl standing in an empty living room with a plate of cookies was chosen, and she thought she was working. Play the other thing, I said. You brought me here for the other thing. She turned the laptop and started the wedding video from September of 2015. She told me she had watched it 300 times. She played 40 seconds of the toast, and then she stopped it and put her finger on the far left edge of the frame. There was a woman standing at the edge of the room. She was not seated. She was not in the receiving line. And she was not on the guest list, because Delia had the guest list in the box and had counted it twice. She wore a gray wool coat indoors in September, and she was not watching the couple. She was watching Sloane. I looked at that frozen picture until the screen dimmed itself. 9 years of thinking my daughter had made a poor choice fell away, and what stood behind it was worse and cleaner and built on purpose. She did not fall in love, I said. She was assigned. Yes, I need to explain what that meant in dollars because it is the whole reason. The Hartwell Family Trust was funded in April of 2015 at $74 million. I named him CO trustee, which means one of two people holding legal authority over the money. Sloan was a beneficiary, meaning a person entitled to receive from the trust. 5 months later, he stood at a microphone in a rented hall and thanked me for my daughter. In December of last year, I signed a trust amendment removing him, and a trust amendment takes effect when it is executed, not when it is filed. He used telephone lines and the mail to move that money for 11 years, and that is what makes it mail fraud and wire fraud, the federal offenses that let Washington reach a man in Belhaven County. Delia closed the laptop halfway and looked at the door for a while. I should have come back for her, she said. That was the only apology she offered me in all of it, and she never offered another one. I watched those 40 seconds 9 more times that night. On the last one, I stopped looking at the woman in the coat and started looking at what my daughter was doing with her left hand while she smiled. A woman who is frightened at her own wedding has been frightened for a long time, and on the morning of 24 February, I decided I was done being the only person in the state who knew any of this. The lake outside the cabin window was the color of galvanized pipe. I had not slept more than 2 hours. I counted the boards in the floor twice before the sun cleared the pines. Delia was already awake at 7, sitting with the wall behind her and her face toward the door. She had made coffee she did not drink. On the table between us sat the memory chip, no bigger than a fingernail, holding 256 gigabytes of another man's business. Beside it sat the blue coffee can with the timer fragment and the hardened line of accelerant inside. We are not walking into the Delmar City field office, she said. I did not argue with her, and that surprised us both. We had gone into that building on the 11th of February and come back out with nothing but a smile and a handshake. A network that had moved $310 million across 23 states does not survive that long by accident. Somebody inside a government office had been paid to look at the wall instead of the file. Then we go around the building, I said. Not through it. Delia wrote a phone number on the back of a grocery receipt with her left hand. Special Agent Ruth Ann Pike had 14 years of service and a habit of writing everything on index cards. She had stood in the corner of that office on the 11th and never once sat down. I had noticed it then the way I notice a junction box mounted crooked. I called at 9:09. Pike answered on the second ring and said one word, which was her whole way of talking. I told her what I had and where I would be. She said one more word and hung up before I could finish the sentence. We picked the meeting place ourselves. There is a gravel turnout on Route 9, about 4 miles south of Quarry Bend, where the land lies flat and open. From that turnout, a person can see 2 full miles of empty road in both directions. Delia walked it once before she agreed to it, and she looked north and then south and then north again. Pike arrived at 1 in the afternoon in a gray sedan with mud on the rocker panels. She parked facing the way she had come. She got out, she looked at my wife for a long 3 seconds, and she said nothing about a woman who had been dead for 9 years. Get in the truck, I said. It is cold. I will not sit down, Pike said. I have not sat down in an office in 6 years, and I am not starting in a truck. Then stand and tell me why I should give you the only thing I have. Because I went over my supervisor's head on 8 February, and Washington answered. I put my hand on the fender of my truck and left it there. 16 days. 16 days while I had been sifting ash and lying to my sister and driving Route 9 in the dark. An assistant United States attorney is already assigned, Pike said. She came from the public integrity section. Her name is Adayeze Okonjo, and she has been a prosecutor for 26 years. An assistant United States attorney is a lawyer who works for the federal government and brings federal charges. The public integrity section is the part of that government that investigates its own. I understood then that Pike had not gone looking for help with a fire. She had gone looking for help with the people who were supposed to investigate the fire. Delia asked her how far it could go. Pike took the chip out of my palm and held it up against the white sky and looked at it for a long time. A federal grand jury cannot be convened on a coffee can, she said. It can be convened on this. She explained it plainly, the way I explain a service panel to a homeowner. A federal grand jury is a group of citizens who hear evidence in secret and decide whether charges may be filed. It indicts. It never convicts. Conviction happens later in a courtroom in front of a different jury entirely. What is on here is mail fraud and wire fraud, Pike said. Letters and telephone lines and transfers used to carry out a scheme to defraud. That is what gives Washington the right to reach into Belhaven County. She took the blue coffee can and set it in a paper sack in her trunk. Then she pulled 3 index cards from her coat and wrote on all 3 standing up using the roof of her own car as a desk. She did not show me what she wrote. She never did, not once in the whole business. You have 48 hours, she said. Go somewhere neither of you has ever been. Not a relative. Not a friend. Not a church. Will Curtis Lomax be told? Delia said. Pike looked south down the 2 empty miles of Route 9. She put the cards in her inside pocket and buttoned her coat. She did not answer the question, and I have thought about that silence every day since because the silence was the answer. Then she pointed at my chest. The chip had ridden under the base plate of my lighter since January, and the base plate was evidence now, and evidence must arrive whole. I took the lighter out of my left chest pocket. Delia had given it to me for our 25th anniversary in a diner booth with her thumb over the engraving, so I would not see it early. I had carried it through 11 years and 1 funeral without a body. I set it in Pike's open hand. My fingers did not want to let go of it, so I made them. For 11 years, I had touched that pocket 40 times a day without thinking about it. I kept doing it for the next 3 weeks. Every single time my hand came back with nothing in it. The lighter was in an evidence bag by then, and I kept reaching for a pocket that did not have it in it anymore. And that is exactly what I was doing when Delia found the page. The room above the hardware store on Ridge Street had 1 window, 1 hot plate, and boxes of stock along the wall. We had come up the outside stairs at 11 in the morning on the 26th of February, and my left knee had counted every step for me. On the way past the shop counter, I saw the small brass tools laid out in a row under the glass. I had stood at that counter in January and paid $9 for a re-wicking. I did not say 1 word about it, and I have never said 1 word about it since. Delia set her chair with its back to the boxes and its face to the door the way she has always done. She laid out the papers left-handed, 1 row at a time, working across the floorboards like a woman laying tile. I made coffee on the hot plate that tasted like the inside of a pipe. For 5 hours, the only sound in that room was paper moving against paper. At 4 in the afternoon, she stopped moving. That was how I knew. A person who has spent 29 years reading fraud for the state does not gasp, and she did not. Ellis, she said, come here and look at this. It was 1 page out of the 3rd box. She told me she had held that box 100 times in 9 years and had never once read that page correctly. It was a summary sheet, the kind an agent prints for his own file. 4 life insurance policies. 4 different carriers. 1 insured person and the insured person was Sloane Hartwell Vandermeer, our daughter. 4 carriers, Ellis, Delia said. Nobody splits a policy 4 ways unless they are hiding the total. How much? I said. $9 million, she said. On our daughter. 2.7 million. 2.4 million. 2.1 million. 1.8 million. All 4 bought in March of last year, inside the same 3 weeks. I read the 4 numbers, and then I read them again, and then I counted them out loud like a man counting breakers in a dark panel. I do that when I am frightened. I have done it since I was 9 years old. Delia explained the shape of it to me, the way she would have explained it to a jury. An insurance company will only sell a policy on a person's life if the buyer would suffer a real loss from that death. That requirement is called insurable interest, and a husband clears it without a question being asked. The person who collects the money is called the beneficiary. Split across 4 carriers, no single underwriter ever sees the whole $9 million sitting on one woman. Then she put her finger on the income figures filed with the applications. Sloane has been a residential realtor for 13 years, and she has never had a year like the one on that paper. The numbers were false by a factor of 6. A carrier will not write $2.7 million on a person who does not earn like that, so somebody built the earnings first and then bought the paper. The last sheet in the stack was not an insurance document at all. It was a distribution schedule for the Hartwell Family Trust, and it showed a 4th withdrawal. $34 million scheduled for the 14th of March. That was 16 days out from where we sat. I understood it in about 4 seconds. That is not courage. It is only that a man who has spent 34 years in the trade learns to see a circuit whole. In December, I signed a trust amendment, which is a signed change to the terms of an existing trust, and it takes effect the moment it is executed, and not when anybody files it. That amendment took Bryce Vandermeer off as co-trustee, meaning one of the 2 people holding legal authority over the money. He could not know about it and still schedule that withdrawal. Unless he was planning on there being no one left to contest it. My hands were on the windowsill. I remember that the paint was cracked and that I pushed my thumbnail into it until the crack got longer. I looked down at Ridge Street, and there was a boy going by on a bicycle with a fishing rod across the handlebars. If you call her, she tells him within the hour, Delia said. You know she does. She has done it with every single thing for 10 years. Then she gets to know, I said. It costs us everything, Ellis. Every piece of it. 2 years of work and 48 hours of protection gone by supper time. She was not wrong. That is the part people never understand about her. In 9 years, I have not once caught that woman being wrong. I sat down on the edge of the cot at 6 at night with the telephone in my hand. I sat there while the light went off Ridge Street and the hardware store closed underneath us and the pipes knocked twice in the wall. I did not pray, and I did not rehearse, and I did not cry. I turned the telephone over and over until the plastic went warm on both sides. Here is where I want to stop and ask you something before I tell you what I did. If it were your daughter and the truth cost you the case, would you make that call? Type the word save if you would pick up the phone. Type the word walk if you would set it down and protect the work. I have wondered for a long time which one of you is right. At 8 hours and 11 minutes past midday, which is 11 minutes past 8 at night, I dialed my daughter. She had left me standing in the rain 23 days before that. She picked up on the 4th ring and said nothing at all. Sloane, do not sign anything in March, I said. She did not say one word back to me. She hung up, and 40 minutes later, Delia looked out the window over Ridge Street and said my daughter's car was already gone from the driveway on Thornfield Court. My daughter did not drive to me on the morning of 27 February, and she did not drive to a lawyer, and by 8 hours and 50 minutes that morning, she had walked into the one building in the state that I had already learned not to walk into. I want to be plain with you before I go any further. I was not inside that building on that day. Everything I know about that morning comes from two things only. The first is a visitor log that I later held in my own two hands. The second is what Special Agent Ruth Ann Pike told me to my face 4 days after. Pike had 14 years of service, and she wrote everything down on index cards. She never sat down in a room that belonged to another person. She kept the photocopy folded twice inside her coat until she was ready. When she handed it to me, she watched my hands instead of my face. The log was 1 page of ruled lines, and the handwriting on line 11 was my daughter's. Sloan Hartwell Vandermeer printed, then signed, then the time in and the time out. 8 hours and 50 minutes past midnight going in. 9 hours and 45 minutes coming out. That is 55 minutes in a room with the assistant special agent in charge of the Delmar City field office. His name is Curtis Lomax, and he had 27 years in and a desk with nothing on it. He calls every living person chief, which is a way of never learning a name. Pike was not in that room, and she said so before she said anything else. She got the rest of it from the interview summary that Lomax filed himself. So I am giving you a document and a person and nothing more than that. She was in with him 55 minutes, and she signed the log herself, Pike said. He asked my daughter twice where her father was staying. She said she did not know. He asked whether she had spoken to me, and she said she had not spoken to me in 3 weeks. She had spoken to me at 11 minutes past 8 the night before for 7 words. I know what her hands do when the words are not true. She lied to a federal agent, I said. She made a false statement to a federal officer, Pike said. Say it that way from now on. Then she explained it to me, the way you explain a hot circuit to a new apprentice. Lying to a federal agent during an official interview is its own separate crime. It does not matter that she was not under oath, and it does not matter what else is true. If she also kept information from an active federal proceeding, that is obstruction of justice, which is a second and heavier charge. My daughter walked into a lobby to protect me and walked out carrying 2 of them. At 9 hours and 52 minutes that morning, 7 minutes after she signed out, a call went off the desk line in that office. Pike had the record, and she read me the number, and she did not tell me who answered it. She told me one more thing instead, and she said it in a flat voice, standing up. An assistant United States attorney named Adayeze Okonjo had traced money into the Delmar City office in 2009. Okonjo is the reason Pike had gone over her own supervisor's head to Washington on the 8th of February. I drove to Port Halloran that evening because Pike asked me to meet her there at 6. It was raining, the kind of cold rain that gets into a bad knee and stays. The hotel across from the federal courthouse has a covered entrance and a valet stand made of dark wood. I stood at that stand with my collar up 10 feet from the glass doors, and I waited. A woman came out in a gray wool coat, and a man came out beside her, and he held nothing, and he carried nothing. His left hand went up to fix his collar, and the back of it had a shiny burn scar across it. I had seen the gray coat once before, at a distance in a county office in February. Neither of them looked at me. A man in a work jacket at a valet stand is not a person to them, and that is exactly why I heard it. She did not lower her voice at all. "Does she sleep well?" the woman asked. "Does she sleep well?" the man said back to her. That was the whole of it. She asked her one question, and she got into the car, and she was gone before the doors finished closing. I counted the panes of glass in that entrance. There were 8, I have thought about those 4 words every night since, and I have never once found a harmless way to hear them. Pike came out at 4 minutes past 6, and I told her what I had heard. She named the man for me. Lucian Rourke, 38 years in business, private equity principal on paper, the operating hand of the whole Kestrel Ridge arrangement. The woman she could not name, and she wrote a description on a card, and she underlined the coat. Then she gave me the last thing, and it was the worst thing. On the 25th of February, the morning after, Pike moved us off that lake. Her people went back through the cabin with a meter and took 2 devices out of it, one behind the stoveplate and one inside the smoke alarm. Both of them had been live for 48 hours. That means on 23 February, somebody sat somewhere and listened. That means somebody heard my wife's voice for the first time in 9 years. I put both hands flat on the wet wood of that valet stand, and I looked at them. They were steady, which surprised me because nothing else was. I took my blood pressure pill at 9 that night in a room over a hardware store with the 3 boxes on the floor by the cot. At 7 hours and 19 minutes the next morning, my telephone lit up with 7 words from my daughter. Dad, I think I made it worse. There was no location. There was no second message. Delia read it over my shoulder and said we needed to find out which buildings in this county still had my daughter's name on them. It took Ruth Ann Pike 4 days to get me into a room with the lawyer from Washington. And on the morning of the 3rd of March, I finally sat across from the only person in this story who called me Mr. Hartwell every single time. The office of the United States Attorney for this district sits 3 floors up in a gray building in Delmar City. My left knee argued with the stairs, so I rode the elevator and counted the floor lights twice. The room was cold enough that I kept my jacket on. I found out later she holds it at 64 degrees on purpose, and I thought of another office in Marrow Bend kept at the same number. There were no photographs on that desk. There was a legal pad, a pencil worn down to a stub, and a laptop turned away from me. Special Agent Ruth Ann Pike stood at the window with her index cards and never once sat down. I put my hand out, because that is what a man does when he meets someone. Adaeze Okonjo, Assistant United States Attorney, formerly of the Public Integrity Section in Washington, 26 years. A prosecutor looked at my hand and left hers on the pad. I do not shake hands until I have filed Mr. Hartwell, she said. It is not personal, and it is not superstition. I put the hand back in my lap. I decided right then that I trusted her more than anyone with a badge I had met so far. Then she did 3 things to me, one after another, in the space of an hour. The first thing she did was take away the blue coffee can. It had sat under a cot for weeks, and it held a timer fragment and a hardened line of accelerant, and in my head it was the whole case. You handled it barehanded, and you kept it under a cot, she said. The chain of custody is gone. She explained what that phrase means because I asked her to. Chain of custody is the written record of every hand that touches a piece of evidence from the ground to the courtroom. If one link is missing, a defense attorney does not have to prove the item is false. He only has to make 12 people wonder. She said a man billing $1,200 an hour would spend 4 minutes on that can and then move on. But it told me where to send my own people, and my people wore gloves, she said. They had gone back to the northeast corner of the burned house on the 26th of February with a warrant. They recovered a second timer fragment from within 2 feet of where I had knelt. That fragment had a photograph, a seal, a number, and a name on every line of the form. Mine had a coffee can and an old man. The second thing she did was reframe everything I thought I was doing. I am not charging them with burning your house, she said. The state can do that. Arson is a state offense and the county can carry it. She set the pencil down flat. She said the fire was never the crime to her. The fire was a tool. Mail fraud and wire fraud are the federal offenses of using the mail or interstate transmissions to run a scheme to defraud, and a claim form crossing a state line is a transmission. That is what made 23 states one case instead of 23 accidents. That is what made it hers. I am charging them with what the fire was for, she said. The third thing she did put my hands on the arms of the chair. She said the trust amendment was never destroyed in any way the law recognizes. A trust amendment is effective when it is signed, not when it is filed in a courthouse. There was one original and it was gone, but Marlon Feist has been the notary and records clerk in Belhaven County for 22 years, and he keeps a handwritten journal of every signature he witnesses. Pike laid a copy on the desk in a clear sleeve. Entry number 4412, the 18th of December, 2024. My name in ink in a slow, careful hand. I had watched him write it and never once looked at the page. A notary journal proves that you signed something on that day, Okonjo said. It does not prove one word of what the something said. So I sent an agent to Ridge Street, and Yolanda Crisp read her own notebook out loud to him across her desk, because that woman will not put anything on a wire. The journal gives me the execution. Your lawyer gives me the terms. Put them side by side and I have a document again, Mr. Hartwell, and a document is a thing I can file. Then Pike turned the laptop around. I knew the picture before the picture came. It was the doorbell camera at 12. Thornfield Court pulled off the cloud account on a warrant 4 days earlier. The house my daughter keeps swept, and the timestamp read 5 hours 41 minutes past midnight on the 3rd of February. There was a man on that step in green flannel pajamas and one left-foot garden boot, and it took me 2 seconds to understand the man was me. I had told that night to myself for 28 days. The 4-inch door. My daughter's face in the gap. The door closing. At 5 hours 42 minutes, her mouth opened. She was starting to say something, and she was stepping back, and she was pulling the door with her to widen the gap. That is the part I never saw because I was looking at her face and not at her feet. Then a hand came into the frame from the left. It came onto her shoulder, and it settled there, and it did not push, and it did not pull. The door closed. Play it again, I said. Play the last 20 seconds again. Pike played it 4 times. I watched my own hands on the desk instead of the screen on the 4th pass. They were flat, and they were still, and there was a fine tremor running under the skin that I could feel and not see. For 28 days, I had believed my daughter shut a door on me. She had not shut it. Somebody standing behind her out of the light had shut it for her while she was opening it wider. Okonjo picked the pencil back up and asked me where Sloan was. I had to sit in that cold room and tell a federal prosecutor that I did not know where my own child had been for 4 days. It took 8 more days to find the one building in Belhaven County that still had my daughter's name on it, and we drove out to Kiln Street on the night of 11th March, 3 days before $34 million was scheduled to move. Fallow Yards is a strip of brick and weeds where the mills died. Nothing out there keeps a light on. Rain came down thin and steady, and it was 39 degrees, the same cold as the first night. The building was a paper warehouse with a loading dock on the south face and one exit on the north wall. Bryce Vandermeer had bought it 3 years earlier as a tax write-off, which means a purchase made mostly to lower what a man owes the government. He put the title in my daughter's name, and then he forgot it. That forgetting is the only reason she was still breathing. I went in the personnel door beside the dock at 9 at night. I read the room the way I always read a room, which is wiring first. Old conduit, dead panel, 2 circuits somebody had jumped with lamp cord. There were pallets of baled paper stacked 11 feet high in 4 rows. Paper stacked like that burns slow until it does not. She came out from behind the second row with her hair up. That is what she does when she is afraid. She had been in that building 11 days, living on canned soup and a camp heater, because it was the only property on earth in her own name. "I opened it 4 inches, Dad," she said. "I have counted them every night." "I have seen the video, Sloan," I said. "You started to open it wider." She stood there with her hand around her own left wrist. She grips it that way when she is lying, and she was not lying. And I understood then that she had been lying to herself for 36 days. "He was standing behind me," she said. I told her that a hand came into the frame from the left and settled on her shoulder. I told her the door did not close because she chose it. I told her she did not have to carry that anymore, and my voice came out flat because I had used everything else up in the parking lot. A small shape came around the pallet and hit my leg at the knee that does not work. Poppy had a crayon in each fist and no shoes on. "Sparky," she said, "Mom says we are camping." Then my wife stepped out of the dark between the rows. "Hello, baby," Delia said. Sloan did not scream. She did not cry either. She looked at her mother for a long 5 seconds, and then she sat straight down on the cold concrete with her legs folded under her. 9 years is not a thing a person can absorb standing up. There was a 4th adult with us that night. She was a task force officer with 11 years on, and from the back, she could have been my wife in a bad light. She stood at the north exit the whole time, and she did not say one word to me. She never spoke on the record, and I never learned her name from her own mouth. Delia had brought 3 boxes. She set them by the dock stairs, and she sat facing the door the way she has sat facing a door since 1990. At 10 hours 40 minutes, a white pickup with no front plate rolled past the loading dock on Kiln Street. It did not stop. It did not slow. Headlights crossed the wall in a long bar, and then the street was black again, and Delia stood up and moved to the window and stayed there. I counted the pallet rows. 4. I counted the roof beams. 9. Counting is what my hands do when the rest of me is behind. At 11 hours 12 minutes, I smelled it. It came in sweet, like orange peel dropped on a hot plate. A citrus solvent. I had smelled it once before, standing in green flannel pajamas and 1 garden boot, and a man does not forget that. I said the word out loud, and I said it once. Then all 4 corners of that building lit at the same second. Point of origin is the exact place where a fire begins. A building set for money has one. This one had 4, and they came up together, north corner, south corner, and both ends of the east wall, which no accelerant pours by accident. That is not arson done to collect on a policy. That is arson done to close a room with people standing in it. At 2 hours 14 minutes past midnight on 3 February, somebody had used 1 point of origin and a wedged door. Whoever was outside on Kiln Street had stopped pretending. The north exit was gone in 90 seconds. The baled paper along that wall went up like a curtain, and the heat came off it in a wall you could lean against. Delia had Poppy against her chest. Sloan was up and moving and pulling on my sleeve, and she was screaming for me to take the stairs. There is a steel stairwell on the east side that goes to a catwalk and a roof hatch. My left knee has not taken stairs since 1998, and it would not take those. I got 4 treads up, and it folded, and I came down on the landing on my shoulder. I told my daughter to go up without me. She said no, and she said it the way her mother says things quietly once. Then a truck door slammed out on Kiln Street. A man, 66 years old, with a knee as bad as mine, and a green thermos still in his hand, came in through the loading dock into the smoke. He had not been inside a burning building in 14 years. He did not ask me about the fire. He did not ask about the corners or the smell or how a locked warehouse came to be lit on 4 sides at once. "Where is the girl, Hartwell?" Otis said. "Just tell me where the girl is." The north exit was gone when I turned around, and my knee would not take the stairs, and that is the exact second I heard the loading dock door go and saw who was standing in it. Otis Duplantis had not been inside live smoke since 2011. He came in low along the floor, the way he taught the young ones to come in. He did not look at me. He looked past me at the small shape my wife was holding against her chest. I pointed. That is all I did. Delia handed our granddaughter over to a man who had sold me, and she did it without 1 second of argument, because the fire did not care what he had done. He put Poppy inside his coat and folded the collar over her face. Then he turned around and walked back into the part of the building that was making noise. He came out on Kiln Street 90 seconds later. He set her down on the gravel and knelt beside her and checked her mouth and her eyes. "She did not breathe any of it," he said. "I had her under the coat." Then he went back in for my daughter. I got to the dock on my hands and one good knee, and I counted the seconds because counting is what I do when I am frightened. I reached 41. Sloane came out first on her own feet with her hair down and her sleeve burned through. Otis came out behind her, and the ceiling had come down across the left side of his face on the way. He was still holding the green thermos. He did not let go of it in the ambulance either. He lost the eye that night. The doctors at Delmar City told him at 9 in the morning, and he said, "Thank you," which is a thing I still think about. At 2 in the morning, I sat in a hospital corridor with a vending machine humming behind me. My wife sat facing the door, the way she has sat since she was 26 years old. My hands were shaking, and I put them under my legs so the nurses would not see. "Cheyenne walked my routes for 6 days, Delia said. "They followed her Ellis. They never followed me." I asked her who decided that. She said she did, and that she did not tell me because I would have told her no. The undercover officer, who resembles my wife, had driven her roads, parked where she parked, and bought coffee where she bought coffee. The people who came to fallow yards came because they were watching the wrong woman. That is the only reason a federal team was 3 minutes out on Kiln Street instead of 30. 3 minutes is my daughter. 3 minutes is the child in the coat. At 4 in the morning, Assistant United States Attorney Adaize Okonjo came down the corridor with a laptop under her arm and a pencil behind her ear. She had not slept either. She sat down across from me and turned the screen so I could not see it, which I understood. Chain of custody is the written record of who touched a piece of evidence and when, and a recording that has been passed around a hallway is worth nothing to a federal grand jury. The file came off the memory chip out of my lighter. It was 40 seconds long. It was recorded in 2015, 4 states away, by a widow named Corinne Ashby, who was 61 years old and owned a dead furniture mill she had been advised to insure. She kept a recorder in her handbag because her hearing was going, and she liked to play meetings back at home. She did not understand what she had. 11 months later, that mill burned at night with her inside it, and everything left of her is the 3rd cardboard box sitting in the trunk of my wife's car. There is a room noise and a chair, and then a woman's voice, calm, unhurried, close to the microphone. "How long has it been since you showed anyone your deed?" Okonjo stopped it there. She looked at me over the top of the screen. "Listen to the first 9 seconds again, Mr. Hartwell," she said, "and tell me if you have heard that voice." I had heard it. I heard it on the 5th of February, across a county records counter, in a gray wool coat, from a woman who asked exactly one question and then walked out into the rain without waiting for the answer. I stood up before Okonjo could say the name. My legs went first, and my hands went second, and I put both palms flat on the vending machine glass until they were quiet. 10 years is a long way for a question to travel. It arrived anyway. At 5 hours, 47 minutes in the morning. On the 12th of March, I stood behind a barrier at the end of a driveway on Cold Orchard Lane. Ruth Ann Pike had sent me one word at 4:30 the way she sends everything, and I was not going to be told to stay home. I was not permitted past the barrier. The rain had stopped and the grass was wet, and there were headlights aimed at the portico. They brought her down the steps in the gray wool coat. She passed within 4 feet of me. Behind her they walked a man of 64, and when he turned toward the car, the headlights caught the shiny burn scar on the back of his left hand. She stopped. Nobody made her. She looked at me the way a person looks at a meter they have already read. "Have you counted it again?" she said. Then she got into the car, and the door shut, and that was the last thing Marguerite Vandermeer Rourke ever said to me outside of a courtroom. 34 years, 23 states, 34 shell entities, $310 million in insurance money paid on buildings that were bought worthless, insured at 4 times value and burned, and sometimes there was a person inside. Arson is the state charge. Mail fraud and wire fraud are the federal ones, and they are what let Washington reach into Belhaven County at all. Delia stood at my shoulder with 3 boxes in the trunk of the car behind us. Okonjo came across the wet grass with the pencil still in her hand. She put out her right hand, and she had not done that once in the 9 days I had known her. "Mr. Hartwell," she said, "I have filed. I have wired 3,000 buildings, and I still could not read the one wire that mattered, the one running through my own family. God gave me 34 years of steady hands, and I spent them counting breakers instead of counting the days I was not speaking to my daughter. The fire did not take 9 years from me. I gave them away one silent winter at a time. Do not be like me. Do not assume the people who wronged you will simply grow tired and stop. Do not let pride convince you that silence is strength. If something in your house smells wrong, a contract, a signature, a smiling stranger at a records counter, stand up and ask the question that night, not 10 years later. Here is what I believe now. Family revenge is not a plan. It is a fever, and fevers burn the healthy tissue with the sick. What saved my granddaughter was not dad revenge. It was a wife who walked her routes for 6 days, a one-eyed fire chief who owed me nothing, but came anyway, and paperwork filed by a woman with a pencil behind her ear. Family revenge feels like justice at 2 in the morning. Evidence is what still stands at 9. So chase the truth, not the fire. Dad revenge may be the story people click on, but the deed, the recording, and the record are what put a gray wool coat into a car. That is the only family revenge worth having, and the only dad revenge I will ever admit to. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments what you would have done at 2:14 in the morning. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Bitter Autumn so the next story finds you. A gentle note, the stories that follow contain fictionalized details written for reflection and learning. If that is not what you are looking for tonight, please step away and choose something that serves you better. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end.